Okay, folks, let's get started. I know that there will probably be a few more people coming, and thanks to all of you who are already here. It's a real pleasure to welcome Dr. Clayton Cunha Filho. He is our second speaker in the Bacardi Family Eminent Scholars Lecture Series and also at our Tropilunch for our Green Business series this semester on exploring the road ahead for sustainability. And he will be talking about Is All That Glitters Green, Promises and Challenges of Green Hydrogen in Ceara, Brazil. He's an assistant professor at the Federal University of Ceara. He's in the Department of Social Sciences as a professor of political science. And I won't take any more time away from his presentation, and he can tell you a little bit more about himself. So thanks again, everyone, for coming. And thank you for coming.
You're welcome. Well, thank you for the invitation. Actually, it's an honor to be here. So as you asked for me to talk a little bit more about myself, I did my PhD at the State University of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, but on a totally different topic. Back then, I was studying state formation in Bolivia. So my thesis was about the national state of Bolivia. And I've just recently started with this research on green hydrogen because in Ceará right now, at least since 2021, it's all the rage within the government and entrepreneurial circles. They're promising it's going to be our golden ticket to development and to richness and all of that. But it's actually funny because I come from a family that's all composed by engineers. My father's a mechanical engineer, my mother's a civil engineer, my older brother's a fishing engineer, my younger brother's an aeronautical engineer, and I went for political science. But I guess one cannot escape its destiny. So now I'm all studying energy and megawatts and gigawatts and all this stuff. So yeah, so thank you all for coming. So let's get started. All right. No, sorry. Yeah. So first, what is this green hydrogen thing, right? So hydrogen is the chemical element that you have.
Can you make the video publish here?
You might be able to move it to the bottom.
How do I do this?
Yeah. Or go.
Okay. So hydrogen is, just a chemical element that you have on the periodic table. It's actually one or maybe the most prevalent element in the universe. According to some sources, they say it's the most. Some say it's the second most. I don't have enough expertise to claim.
Sorry.
Floating meeting controls. Two more down.
Where is it? Two down?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm
There you go,
sorry.
there you go.
Sorry. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. So okay. So yeah, it's one of the most prevalent elements in the universe. Chemically speaking, it reacts with almost everything. So normally you would find it colligated with other substances, like for instance in water, like with oxygen becomes water, but also in petrol and natural gas. There are hydrocarbons, and the hydro comes from this hydrogen part. It has known fuel potential since at least the 19th century. As you could recall, those big Zeppelins, they were fueled by hydrogen. Then later it was abandoned for security issues, but then they started again. It's using rocket fuels and all the such. But it's also a very important industrial feedstock in many industries, like refining, chemical industry, steel making, but above all on fertilizers. So according to the International Energy Agency, IEA, on 2023, about 54 megatons of hydrogen were consumed as industrial feedstock, but the majority, and actually almost the entirety of which, obtained through fossil fuels. But it can be obtained by clean sources. So what they're calling this green hydrogen is basically hydrogen that you obtain from electrolysis of water. You inject an electrical current in water So you split the hydrogen and the oxygen atoms. So if this electricity is renewable energy, if it's not, if it does not emit carbon, so this hydrogen would be clean, because at consumption point, if you burn hydrogen, what you produce is water vapor, so there's no harm in it. But if you obtain it from fossil fuels, so then it's useless, right? You would be emitting carbon through the obtention of this hydrogen. But as renewable energies are becoming cheaper, so they predict that in the near future, it will be as cheap or even maybe cheaper to obtain hydrogen from renewable energy sources than you get from fossil fuels. And as such, you could use this hydrogen to for these industries that they call the hard to abate sectors. That is, sectors in which it's very hard to directly electrify it. So you could use hydrogen as this energy vector, and if this hydrogen is clean, so this industry would be clean as well. This thing with the green, actually, the hydrogen itself, it's colorless. You wouldn't see it if it wasn't here. You wouldn't see it, and actually, it's also a bit of one of the challenges, because when it combusts, this fire is also invisible. So they are dealing with ways in which, so if there is a leak in hydrogen, some way to detect it, because it could be dangerous. But then early, they had this attempt to classify it by colors. They used to say that the rainbow of hydrogen. So the gray would be the one that you obtain through natural gas. Then the blue, if you obtain it from natural gas, but you store and you capture this carbon, so it's not emitted to the atmosphere. So the green would be this one obtained through water electrolysis. The pink one would be the one through nuclear energy. And what they used to call the white hydrogen would be the natural hydrogen that you can find in some natural deposits, which up to recently they thought it was very rare because of this reactivity of hydrogen. Nowadays they're seeing it's more common than they thought, but although there's still not available technology to extract and to utilize this hydrogen, but they are trying to develop some. But nowadays they're abandoning this color classification. There was never really an international standard about it, and now they just tell it low carbon hydrogen. So if you read the IEA, they do this global hydrogen report yearly, and nowadays they just call it a low carbon hydrogen. But what this low carbon hydrogen is, it depends also on national regulations. So the European Union threshold, they allow it to be called low carbon hydrogen if it emits a maximum of 3.4 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per kilogram of hydrogen produced. I'm sorry, I'm not using the imperial units. I will be talking on kilograms and kilometers. At least with kilograms, it's easy. You just roughly multiply it by 2, and yeah, so you divide it by 2, and then you have it in pounds, right? Multiply by 2. The US threshold is a little bit more generous, 4 kilogram, and the Brazilian law is even more, so it's 7 kilograms. So it wouldn't be really clean depending on what it is. But the major boost for the interest in hydrogen in Brazil came from the European interest to import such hydrogen. So, for example, in Ceara, it's only basically the green hydrogen, which wouldn't emit any carbon at generation point, really. So this data came from the last report from the IEA. So that's the production and the usages of the hydrogen in the world today. So as you can see, mostly it's used to produce ammonia, which is the feedstock for fertilizers. But also to produce methanol, a little bit on steel making, some other usages. But the share of low emission hydrogen, low carbon hydrogen, is, as you can see, very, very low. This NZE 2030, it's a projection for what they call the net zero emissions scenery by 2050, and the projection of where we should be by 2030 to achieve that scenario. So as you can see, we're way behind that. Most of the hydrogen produced nowadays, it's from fossil fuels without any capture of carbon. So almost the entirety of it, is dirty hydrogen. And there's another thing that it's worth mentioning, is that, as you can see, most of this hydrogen is produced on site. So, for example, in a refinery, they deal with their petrochemicals, and then they produce some hydrogen while they're refining petrol, and then they reutilize this hydrogen for other uses. And what they call merchant hydrogen, which you hardly see, and they project should be greater by 2030, they are produced not on site, but very near. And that's because one of the major difficulties that they have in hydrogen nowadays is it's very difficult to transport, because it has an energetic potential that's very, very big, even greater than petrol itself. But in its natural form, hydrogen is a very, very light gas. So it would occupy a very, very large area, which makes it difficult to transport. So in order to transport it, you need to either convert it into liquids, but liquid hydrogen, I'm sure you have all seen these sci-fi movies where they have liquid hydrogen and it touches the skin and it immediately freezes and breaks and stuff, because liquid hydrogen is almost the absolute zero. It's just a few degrees above 0 Kelvin. It's the absolute zero. So that implies energy usage. You need energy to convert it into liquid. You could also compress it to make it fit into a smaller container, but it also implies energy usage. So you're wasting energy to transport it. Nowadays, they are betting that the best way to transport it would be to convert it into ammonia, because there is already an international market for ammonia because of the fertilizer industry worldwide. So there are already boats that are designed for this transport. There are already ways of storing it, but it also implies a loss of energy as such. Because if you're not using it in the ammonia form, you would need to reconvert it into hydrogen, and so you lose a bit of energy in one way and then on the other way. They are trying to research ways of using it for other uses already at the ammonia form, but it's still not commercially available. One of the ironic things is that at the early usages of hydrogen, until at least the mid of the 20th century, most of it was already the green hydrogen produced through water electrolysis using hydroelectricity. Because at that time, there wasn't still enough technology to transport ammonia. So almost every country would have at least a small plant to produce ammonia to produce the fertilizers they would need for their agriculture. But then, because this was developed, so many countries abandoned that, and then they found out that you could produce hydrogen through hydrocarbons. It was a bit cheaper, and it was mostly abandoned. But yeah, so we get to the next slide. So talking about the Brazilian National Hydrogen Plan. So Brazil had an early hydrogen program since at least 1998, but not much funding, just basic research. It started at Unicamp, it's one of our biggest universities there at Campinas, at the state of São Paulo. But on this current usage, our national hydrogen plan was established in 2021, but it was very vague, not many details on what the aims were, what their targets were. So many of the critics called it a plan to make plans, which in many ways it was. But even though many states started, their own plans and started signing memoranda of understanding for investments with private companies, so Ceara was one of it, and one that was leading this race in Brazil. Ceara, as I will show you, is the one that has the biggest number of MOUs signed. And then Congress started discussing, a national framework law in 2022 that was finally approved last year and signed into law by President Lula. When Lula was already the president now, so in 2023, they made this better detailment of the plan, so a triennial work plan. that has, now specific aims and the targets. So the main ones is to, by 2025, to disseminate pilot plans. We already have one in operation in Ceará since the end of 2022, inaugurated officially in 2023. And then by 2030, to consolidate production hubs throughout the country and to consolidate Brazil as the most efficient producer of low carbon hydrogen in the world. Let's see if we can get there, but that's the plan, that's the objective anyway. And the state of Ceará, last year, they published this master plan for our production hub, in which they make a determinant and a comparison with other countries that are supposed to be big producer, big players in this emerging market, mainly Australia, Chile, Spain, Morocco, and Canada, in which they compare what are their characteristics, the differences, how are they similar to Ceará, how are they different, how can they be competitors or maybe some synergies and whatever. They also made an exhaustive listing of all the value chain in hydrogen since construction until operation, and with a listing of local companies in Ceará and in Brazil that could be competitive to be suppliers in this value chain, with the aims of maximizing the utility of it, not just come some international company with everything on the package there. So maybe buy the steel from local makers and whatever. And they also make 20 recommendations to enhance this hub. And the first one that they give, I highlighted there, is to position Ceará as the ideal location for a green hydrogen hub, not only for exceptional climate conditions, but also for port infrastructure, unequivocal local commitment, and clarity of direction. So actually, one of the main strategies, even before that was published, this was already in action. So nowadays, they present hydrogen as if it were like a true consensus in the state. The business leaders, the government, the academia, everyone is on board. And this is going to be, like I said, our golden ticket to prosperity and to development. But let's see a little bit more about that. So Ceará is not the most well-known state in Brazil. So for the ones of you who don't know it, I don't blame you. I didn't know about Gainesville until very recently, to be honest. Of course, I knew the University of Florida, but I didn't know where it was located. I assumed it would be in Miami or something, but then I found out it's in Gainesville. But yeah, so a little bit of context on Ceará. It has a population of about 8.8 million almost, half of which is in the capital Fortaleza and its metropolitan region. And Fortaleza itself is almost 3 million, so 2.8, 2.9 million, and then 4 in the whole metropolitan region. So the state is very concentrated in the capital, due in a great deal to our climate, which is not very welcoming sometimes in the hinterland. So in the hinterland it could look like that, but then on the coast it looks like that, so not bad. That's the beach of Lagoinha. It's about 100 kilometers west of Fortaleza. But like I said, 85% of its territory is located in the semi-arid, northeastern semi-arid climate. So we don't have much rain. Actually, the main problem is not really the scarcity of rain, but the irregularity. So maybe you would have a year where it rains very much and it's all the farmers in the hinterland, they are very happy, but then you get 5-6 years of almost no rain, right? So to give an idea, so we have an endemic vegetation that's only present in the Brazilian Northeast. It's called Caatinga, which is it means white woods in the Tupi-Guarani language. And when it doesn't rain, it looks like this. But it starts raining, then it's all green and lush and vivid and stuff. So these pictures is just 1 month apart from each other. Because of me here, you can't see it really well. But it really becomes very, very green. But when the rain ceases, then all the leaves are falling, like in that song, and then it looks dead as that gets. But then on the next rain, then the life comes about yet again. Economically speaking, we were historically one of the poorest states in Brazil. Now it would be like mid-table. We're the 13th biggest economy. It's 27 states. So yeah, we're like in the middle. The GDP of about $33.2 billion. So it's not really a big economy. About 5% of it, it's composed by agriculture and herding, because the climate is not very suitable for, commercial agriculture, large scale one. About 70% of our economy is on services, among which tourism, as you could guess from, the nice beaches we have. We have strong winds, which is a big part of the story of this interest in the hydrogen. But you come to Ceara, and then you will see lots of mostly European tourists that come to windsurf there year round. And the climate is like that year round. So when it's very freezing, maybe in New York, you could go to Ceara, it's going to be great. And when it's hot here, you could go there, it's still going to be great. Climatic speaking. And about 25% industry. So mostly textile and footwear. We are a very important regional textile and footwear hub in Brazil, but also metallurgy and some chemical industry. And politically speaking, this very recently, since the military dictatorship and up to now, we have three main political cycles that succeeded each other in opposition to the previous one. So during the dictatorship, we had this one called the colonial cycle. Actually, the word colonial, these three governors, they were indeed colonels from the army. But colonel in the Brazilian political jargon, it means a little bit like caudillo, like you would say in Spanish. So because you would have lots of local strongmen, and they would call themselves a colonel, although they were not really in the army. But then this cycle was called the colonial cycle with this double meaning, because the opposition labeled them, because this was a derogatory term normally, but they were indeed army colonels. Then they were succeeded during the democratization by the Mudancista cycle. It was called as such because they labeled them, so their slogan was the Governo das Mudanças. Mudança is change in Portuguese. So it became known as the Mudancista cycle. And they tried to make this steep break. We are bringing change. We're democratizing, and we're going to bring change and development to Ceará. And then they were succeeded by the current cycle that still has the name. Normally, you get the name afterwards, but they're still in power. Just sorry, these dates are wrong. I wrote it wrong. That's when he became a representative. This one was from 75 to 78, but it's not important. But the reason I mentioned these cycles is because all of them, when they came to power, they constructed themselves as opposition to the previous one. But the development plan is basically the same, with updates and small changes, and it didn't really change. So nowadays, the state of Ceará, in national terms, it's a net energy exporter. We generate more energy than we consume, and we send it to the rest of Brazil. But that was not the status that we had until the 60s. So in Ceará, we had a very precarious electricity provision until 1965. At first, until the mid-50s, it was basically thermal plants based on wood. And because it devastated the local forest, so wood was running low, so we had a big crisis. Then they built another thermal plant in Fortaleza based on oil, which sort of stabilized the system, but this oil was imported. It was very expensive, so it wasn't really a solution. I showed you these two pictures. In the first one, you can see an old wood thermal plant, and the latter one is the oil one that was built in the 50s. Now the plant is not there, but now the neighborhood there has the name of the former plant. It was the Serviço whatever of Luiz, so it became Servi Luiz. So now it's the name of the neighborhood. But then in '65, they built a transmission line from the hydroelectricity dam in Paulo Afonso in the state of Bahia It wasn't supposed to reach Ceará, it was supposed to only be on the surroundings, but then there was great lobbying by the elites of the state and other neighboring states, so they built this transmission line. It reached Fortaleza in 1965. So it solved the electricity issue. And ever since, the local elites, they started dreaming about industrializing the economy as a way to overcome the poverty. Since, because of the climate, large agriculture wasn't feasible. So they said, hey, maybe now that we have electricity, we should industrialize the state, and that will be how we will develop. So, like I said, this basic idea has gone through all these three political cycles, even though the next one was always saying, hey, the last one was not very good, and now it's when we're going to solve it. But the basic idea remains, so that's why I'm calling it the Ceará consensus. And the big dream of them was to attract heavy industries so as to consolidate this industrialization. Basically a steel plant and a refinery. But this is a case of, a half full, half empty glass, because the state did attract industries. Like I said, it is still a very important textile and footwear production hub in Brazil. If you go to Fortaleza on a Sunday morning and you go to downtown, you're going to see lots and lots of buses parked all over, and people all over like ants buying lots of clothes so that they come from all the neighboring states and then go there to resell all this production. Up to this day, it's like that. But we only got our steel plant in 2016, and we still have no refinery. So all this, heavy industry, it's still something ongoing. And it, like I said, is a case of a glass half full and half empty. Because in 1987, the local GDP in Ceará, in comparison to Brazil, so Brazil, Ceará, represented about 1.6% of the Brazilian GDP by 87. This figure grew to 2.2 in 2015, and it has remained as such until, sometimes it gets 2.4, then it gets back to 2.1, but never much about it. And the big dream that they had was to at least equalize it to our population proportion. So Ceará represents about 4% of the Brazilian population. So our economy participation in the GDP is lesser than our population. And they started a few years ago talking about the 2% curse that we couldn't overcome and we need to do something about it. And now they are betting that with the hydrogen, that's when we're going to do it. So yeah, I'm covering a little bit also the production of the energy here, but here. Okay, good. So as you can see, we have lots of energy production, and more than half of it is renewable by wind and solar power. But still lots of thermal, 40 something percent, 31% by thermal still. But this is a very recent development also, because in 65 we solved the electricity scarcity, but it was imported from another state. So during the Mendonça cycle, they one of their aims was to increase energy production in Ceará itself, so it would be a better attraction to heavier industries. So they started investing in smaller thermal plants. But what really changed it was a national energy crisis that we had between 2000 and 2002 by the end of the Fernando Henrique Cardoso administration, because Brazilian electricity generation was historically very dependent on hydroelectricity. So almost all of our electricity came from hydropower. And in those years, we had a national drought that compromised the energy capacity. And then the Brazilian government started a program to build emergency thermal plants so that they could be used whenever the hydroelectricity was not available to stabilize the system. So we got our first big one during that period. But what was more important, especially having this hydrogen thing in mind, was that along with it, they also started this Pro-Infra program to start investing in alternative energy sources that were not utilized. So basically at first wind, and then since 2016 solar. And it started with wind because by the time both energy sources were way, way more expensive than anything else, than hydroelectricity or even the thermal plants. But the technicians from the Ministry of Energy, they made this calculation that, well, solar power is too expensive and to produce it locally, it's unfeasible. We don't have, the capacity to produce it in Brazil. But with wind energy, with industrial policies, we could attract the producers to produce it locally. So yeah, it's more expensive, but you could offset that cost with, job generation and a new industry and all that such. And that indeed paid off. So now Brazil produces more than 90% of the components that are around wind industry. And Ceará itself, we have a factory of Aeris Energy, it's a Brazilian company that produces wind blades at the port of Pecém, and the local branch of the Danish Vestas that produces turbines at the city of Aquiraz in the metropolitan region of Fortaleza, but to the other side. The Pecém is to the west, and then Aquiraz is to the east. Ceará is now the third biggest producer of wind energy in Brazil. The first is Bahia, the second is Piauí or Rio Grande do Norte, I'm not sure, and then it's Ceará, but it's a major producer. And like I said, it is a national energy exporter because we produce like double what we actually consume in Ceará. So that's a picture of the Pecém port that was built during the Mudancista cycle as one of their main investments in infrastructure in order to try to finally attract these heavy industries. Because Fortaleza also has a port since the 70s, I think, but it is it's choked up. It's not, the waters are not very deep, and the city has grown around it, so it cannot expand. So they invested in this port, which is a modern port with very, very deep waters, and it's not constrained. It has an industrial area to try to reserved for industrial attraction. So it was built between 2002 and 2006. Since 2018, it's a joint venture with the Rotterdam port. It controls now 30% share of our port. And one of the reasons Ceará is becoming very looked after for hydrogen production, it has to do with the projected low cost for energy generation. So in this heat map, so as redder as you get, it's the cheaper you would have this energy for hydrogen production. So it's it's not the reddest, but it's still good enough. But also, we are very close to potential consumers. So Ceará, actually, it's the closest place you get in Brazil to Europe. So from Fortaleza to Lisbon is just a 6.5-hour flight to the west coast of Africa. Now we don't have this direct flight anymore since the pandemic. We did have a direct flight to Cape Verde. It was only 3 hours, actually a bit less than 3 hours. So it was closer to fly to Cape Verde than it is to fly to Rio de Janeiro, for instance. Rio de Janeiro is 3.5. And it's close to the east coast of the US as well. So, like I said, one of the main bottlenecks with hydrogen nowadays is transport. So it's already an important industrial feedstock, but you don't have an international market for hydrogen. So like I showed in that graph from the IEA, it's mainly produced on site or very near the production site because the transportation is a little bit difficult and it's costly. So in Ceará, you could produce it, and then it wouldn't be so far if you want to export it to Germany or to whatever. And the Rotterdam port is the one that the European Union is investing at. It's already one of the major energy hubs in Europe. It's where they get petrol and other fuel sources, but it's also now projected to be the main entry port for hydrogen in Europe. There will be other ports as well, but Rotterdam is already one of the biggest ports in the world, maybe the biggest even. I'm not sure. I never remember. It's Rotterdam, Hamburg, and one in Belgium are the three biggest ones. But yeah, So we have this very big proximity to potential consumers, and therefore they think that they are projecting that it's one of the ideal locations for productions. That picture there is when the framework law was signed by President Lula, and he signed it at the Pecém port because it was symbolic, since it's the one that has the biggest number of investment agreements. So he went there to sign it. Here, this is the current governor. This is the former governor that's now the Minister of Education. And the other are business leaders from the Industrial Federation. So they all were there. It's a big celebration. And now we go. So this nice picture is, this marketing map that they're, they always put in. So it looks very nice, very neat, very organized. Though it's not really realistic because they put it like the production of the energy is in the port itself, which is not. It's going to be produced all out throughout the state. But it's for business, for promotion, that's good, right? It looks very neat, very organized. Maybe if someone played, this simulate like SimCity, these video games and stuff, or Lego or whatever, it looks very beautiful. But it also has some implications on that, which I'll come to by the end of my presentation. But this one is a more, actual one. It's an aerial image where they are putting how it's going to be organized. So you have the port itself here, the industrial zone is around here where they're going to produce the green hydrogen. And mostly all the producers are saying they're going to produce it as ammonia because of this transportation issue. And it's mostly private investment that's being announced, but lots of public investment already underway for the common infrastructure. Because one of the ways that the state government is trying to promote it as a good production site is that, well, you produce it and we will provide all the other common infrastructure. So there's going to be a pipeline that will connect your production to the port. There's be common shared tankage so that you can store it before you can't do it. So it's going to be cheaper for you and so and so. The water treatment plant, which is an issue in Ceará because it is attractive for renewables, because one of the reasons is because we don't have that much rain. So the solar energy is very, very productive, but because you need water to produce it, so that's an issue. They are promising that they're going to use treated wastewater to do it, so that it wouldn't stress, the water consumption. It remains to be seen if they will be up to their word, because the industrial plants that we already have there nowadays, they don't use treated wastewater. They use the common water that everyone uses. So it's a source of water stress in Ceará. But let me show you a little table. These are the about 40-something memoranda of understandings that have been signed. The only one in operation is a pilot plant. Some of them have evolved to a pre-contract, which is when they already have already reserved at the port where they are going to build their plant if they build it, and they start paying rent for it. But it is also this is just big promises because there is nothing committed yet. So even the ones that are in pre-contract, maybe they would say, well, I changed my mind, I'm not going to do it. And we don't know it. Most of them, there's lots of commercial secrecy, so that's why lots of the cells here are just not disclosed because you can't get information, but some have already disclosed a little bit of it, so I try to fill it in whenever possible. But here, let's just see the ones that are in a more advanced stage. So they come from different countries, most international, but there are also some Brazilian conglomerates that are willing to participate in it. Unfortunately, I didn't do it, by sector of all the energy, but it's all the companies that are trying to invest. But there is also something to be a bit skeptical about it because lots of them are oil companies that, or at least, for example, this one, Casa dos Ventos Comerc, is a Brazilian company, but 30% share controlled by Total oil company. And there are lots one that are, a subsidiary of an oil company with a beautiful name, but by British Petroleum or by Shell or whatever. But yeah, so up to now, the biggest private investment that we have in Ceará is that steel plant that I mentioned. It was inaugurated in 2016. It's now controlled by ArcelorMittal, one of the major steel producers in the world. By then, it was an investment of $5.4 billion. So as you can see, just for example, this Fortescue Australian mining company, it's promising to invest $6 billion. So that's why all the business leaders and the government are all, their eyes are like big dollar bills flashing all over. Because since our economy is not that big, so it will have a tremendous impact really in economic terms if these promises of investments materialize. But like I said, none of them has yet reached what they call in business the FID, the final investment decision. That's when they are already committed and already doing the research. But that's not a thing only to Ceará. So worldly, that's the thing in the world. So according to the IEA, the last report, only about 7% of all announced investments in hydrogen worldwide have already reached an FID. But we will see. The size of the electrolyzers, some of them are also, their promise are already they're really impressive. But so, for example, the Fortescue one is 2.1 gigawatts of potency. Right now, the biggest one that's already in operation is a Chinese one, and it's only about 460 megawatts. So it's like 4 times smaller or something. So there are already technological questioning about how feasible it is, and they're trying to work it out. Even this Chinese one, it has had some glitches in which they're trying to work out. So the picture is already, lots of promises, but much still remains to be seen. So coming to the end of my presentation, well, in many of the events that they are holding in Ceará, I've been like every day, almost every month, I'm going to 2 or 3 that they are hosting at the Federal Industries Association or the government or at the state, the local House of Representatives and such. And they all talk about it as a big thing, our golden ticket, like I mentioned. But I've heard, for example, by Jorge Arbache from the Latin American Development Bank, he said once that, well, it's a big opportunity because it's going to bring green industrialization to the state. And he said, it's going to represent to Ceará what São Paulo represented to the Brazilian industrialization in the early 20th century, which is São Paulo is the most industrialized zone. It's where it kick-started. But oftentimes, the comparison that I hear the most is they say, well, green hydrogen is make Ceará the Saudi Arabia of hydrogen, or the United Arab Emirates, or the Dubai of hydrogen, which conjures up a very different idea of what this development is. So, yeah, will it be really an industrialization, or will we be producing a new commodity for export, an energetic commodity? Like instead of extracting oil and sending abroad, we are going to generate energy and then bottle it up as hydrogen and send it away, right? But they're presenting this thing as a true consensus, as a form of a de-risking strategy for investment production. So, hey, everyone is on board, so there's no risk. Come here. Everyone is on board, but let's see. We actually already have some potential users installed at our port, at the Pecém port, the steel plant. And I indeed heard Eric Torres, the current CEO of the plant, in one of these events, said, but he said it, so it's like, talk is cheap, right? There's nothing signed yet. But he said, whatever hydrogen you produce, I commit to buy it because we are going to decarbonize our whole production. So you bring it to me and we're going to use it because our steel plant is based on coal. So he is promising that he will use hydrogen. That would be good, but it remains to be seen. Up to now, it's just a word. But yeah, but we have a steel plant, we have industrial gases that could use it, cement plants that could use it. And they are betting on what they're calling this power shoring, that, attraction of industries to places where you have lots of energy available. And they are betting that that could be used to finally attract our refinery and mostly fertilizer industry, because as they will be producing ammonia, they could use that ammonia to produce some of the fertilizers. And Brazil is a major agricultural exporting economy, but we import, I think, more than 80% of the fertilizers that we use. So that's feasible to imagine that they could, start producing locally these fertilizers. But still, it's still a promise that remains to be seen. Like I mentioned, there are many uncertainties, some of them national, but lots of them international uncertainties. So just 7%, according to the last report, of the announced investments in hydrogen have reached this FID stage. So many have been canceled, many are still on this, let's see, we want it, but let's see how it goes. And the thing is, because there are, according to these IEA reports, there are, for example, port infrastructure is one of the main bottlenecks in many places. That they are betting many places in Africa that they could produce. They would be even closer to the European market. In some of them, they could even build a pipeline to connect it directly, which would lower costs. But they don't have ports that are equipped to that kind of export. So lots of infrastructure would need to be built. And so the state government in Ceara that's why they are promoting our port as one of our major assets to attract these investments. I even heard the then Economic Development Secretary, Mendonça Filho, he said, the Port of Pecém is the crown jewel of Ceara's modernity in one of these events. So they are promoting it as something very big. But yeah, there are many things. But also some of these international uncertainties, they could be good for us in a way that, like I said, there isn't an international market for hydrogen yet. And the global industry of hydrogen nowadays, it's facing sort of a chicken and egg problem, because there isn't enough hydrogen production because there isn't enough market for it. But there isn't enough market for it because there isn't enough, green hydrogen being produced. So who will go first? So many of these international agencies, the IEA, the World Bank, the World Economic Forum, and many others, they have started on their last reports to start promoting that, hey, you in Latin America, you in Africa, you should invest in local consumption of that hydrogen, because that way we could, kickstart production, and then after that, enable the export. So these 2024 IEA report, they have their the final session is entirely focused on Latin America and potential local consumers, and how Latin America could foster these local consumers so as to kickstart the production, and then maybe make this world market come true. But one thing that Hanush and Shad had noticed by looking at all these promises of hydrogen worldwide is that when they think about what are the challenges, normally they only concentrate in technological challenges. How do we make it so it's safe if there is a leakage in hydrogen, since it's invisible and even the flame is invisible? How do we make it so that the boats can transport the hydrogen? How do we make it so that we can consume it already in ammonia form without loss of energy? So there is this trend of technology first and social environment concerns later. So later, yeah, well, maybe certainly there will be some impact, but later we'll see it. And of course we will solve it, I promise. But yeah, they are never really discussed. And if we take the wind industry in Brazil as a parameter, there are already lots and lots of conflicts around it. They have to do with land tenure, and then they pay low rent that they pay to agricultures, make them sign contracts for long terms that they don't really understand, with a very low payment of rent, and they cannot utilize their lands anymore for agricultural deals. there's also another one that they call it the sons of the wind, which is, at construction points. So there come lots of, male workers, young male workers to the site, and then they leave lots of young girls pregnant, and then they go away, and then, lots of, women, lots of children without fathers, and many, many others, and also environmental impacts. And as this production of hydrogen will need a lot more energy to be produced, so yeah, you can bet that probably we will have a lot more conflicts surrounding it. And that's actually one of the main shortcomings of the renewable energies, is that if you want to produce energy from a thermal plant, so it's just one big city block that produces enough energy for maybe the whole city itself, or maybe more than one city. But to produce the same amount of energy through wind or solar, you need a much, much, much larger area. So yeah, probably much more land conflicts surrounding it that will come especially if we leave the social environment concerns for later and just focus on the technological part of it. And in the official fora that they are establishing in Ceará, so they made this Green Hydrogen Council. So there are seats for lots of different government secretaries, for the Federation of Industries, for the university, but hardly any for civil society. One of the events that I went, it was on our state legislative assembly. It was it's an anecdotal, of course, evidence, but it really caught my attention because during the ceremony, so it was a special ceremony for hydrogen that was being held there. So the people on the tribune, they were, whenever a notable came in, so they were, oh, I would like to notice that the secretary of whatever is here, that the director of this company is there, that the governor has just arrived, that the senator and blah, blah, blah is there. But there was a group of indigenous people, they were way behind on the galleries, and they started putting protest posters saying it's in our land and we are not being consulted. And no one even, acknowledged their presence there. So they would mention all the secretaries and deputies and senators and governors and whatever, and not even, for lip service, just to say, hey, we are seeing that the Indians are there, and don't worry, we're gonna, not even for that. So it's actually recorded. You can see the ceremony live, but if you watch it, you won't even know that they were there. I only know because I was presently. Luckily, because I decided to go. I could have stayed home and watched it on the live, but if I hadn't been there, I wouldn't know that. And that's not the only case. It's, of course, this evidence is anecdotal, but like I said, in the official forum, there's hardly ever any space for civil society. So that is worrisome. And also, that is why I named it, is all that glitters really green, because who will actually decarbonize with our hydrogen production? Because, maybe we will just be producing this energetic commodity to decarbonize European industry, maybe Japan, maybe the US, but the US is not very interested in that anymore, according to the latest news. But, and then not ours. So that's already a contradiction. But also, even if we, all the Brazilian industry commits to decarbonize, and we start using this hydrogen to decarbonize, and all of a sudden, all of our industry is not emitting carbon anymore. Still, Brazilian industry is responsible for about 20, 22, 23% of our carbon emissions. But the change in land usage is responsible for 49%. So that's like when you deforest an area for an industrial use or to build houses or whatever. So because to produce this energy, we will need to encroach on many natural sites that now have it's covered by woods, and you will chop them down to put sun panels to produce this energy. So because we will need much more energy, we will need much more land. So even if we decarbonize all of our industry, we could end up in a situation where, because of this increase in the change of land usage, we are actually emitting more carbon than we were before. So that's one contradiction that hardly ever gets mentioned. And yeah, normally when people think of deforestation in Brazil, you think about the Amazon forest, where indeed it is a big problem. And the Amazon is, sexier, big forest, the biggest tropical rainforest, and etc. You don't normally think about the Caatinga in the northeast of Brazil, especially when it's in the dry season, because people think, yeah, all this dried up wood, yeah, you just take them down. But it actually does have a very important role and ecological role in carbon absorption. So when you take that out, you're emitting carbon to the atmosphere. So just to conclude, we don't have yet offshore wind. We just last year approved the framework law, but the companies have already been fighting at the National Energy Agency for, I wanna build it here and here and here. And so this is an actual map of Ceará from east to west coast. As you can see, they are projecting to cover almost all of the coast with offshore wind farms. But as you can see they overlap with each other, and they also overlap with lots of things. So with oil rigs, they overlap with commercial cruise lines. What happened? Well, okay, cruise lines that from the port itself, but also lots of local fishermen. There is a big part of the local economy that depends on fishing. So they are very worried about it. They will lose access to their fishing sites, because on the onshore wind farms, there is a big area around it that becomes off limits to anyone. So you can't go there. So they're afraid that maybe they won't be able to fish where they have been fishing for, generations. And like I said about that neat, nice promotion map, when you put a map like that, it's projected as an empty space. So, it's empty. Let's, bring development here. So it has a kind of an ideological reason for these kinds of maps, because you don't show it with the people inhabiting it, so that you don't think about it. So yeah, let's bring billions of dollars, bring the investments, bring development, bring the money. Then let's see the rest later. So yeah, so that's why the question is it all that glitters really green? It remains to be seen. So I leave it here, and I'm open to any questions that you might have. Thank you.